All right, everyone, this is the PRL rear motor mount for the 11th gen Civic. This one is for the sport hatchback with the 2.0 K20C2 engine. So if you guys have been following the channel, there's been some engine bay rattles going on that I can't diagnose, so I figured the best way to diagnose them is to make everything rattle all the time. For real though, the reason I am installing this is not because I'm trying to reduce wheel hop or anything, which is what people try to do with the Type R or a high-powered SI that's tuned and whatnot. That's not my goal here. I really just want to reduce the engine flex in the engine bay to make the car feel better when I'm driving. So as weird as it sounds, I do kind of like a little bit more NVH transmitted to the inside of the car than most people would. And a lot of people's first question is when you go with a rear motor mount, how much is the increase in NVH? Well, my goal is to try to get a little more than stock so I can actually be more engaged with the car and feel what RPM I'm at a little bit more. In my opinion, a tiny bit of NVH through the steering wheel from the engine when you're driving a manual car is a good thing. And the benefit of this is we'll also reduce the engine flex in the engine bay between shifts when you're coming off from a stop, releasing the clutch kind of quick. You won't feel that jerky motion of the engine flexing back and forth. Like when you let off the throttle in gear, you can feel the delay between your input and you can feel the engine rock forward until you can feel the axles load and start to slow the car down. So this should eliminate a lot of that lag time in between. And that is my main goal with this. It's not because I think this car makes a lot of power. In fact, it's very stock. It's only 158 horsepower. In my last video, I did the PRL high volume intake just for a little bit better sound. For daily driver use, we're gonna see if this makes the driving experience that much better. Of course, I don't want it to rattle the inside of the car to make it feel like a total shitbox, but I believe this will just transmit a little bit of vibration on the inside that will make it a more pleasurable driving experience. If it is too much to handle, I'll obviously let you guys know. I do have my little kids in the back of this car on occasion, so if there's anything that is obnoxious, I'm obviously gonna uninstall it. But I think this will be a good compromise, mainly because the PRL rear mount uses a molded EPDM rubber bushing on both sides. And I've had some really bad experiences with polyurethane in the past. I've tried them on my 8th gen SI. I've tried using polyurethane for various suspension components over the years. And you'll see in this picture here, this is not my picture, but it's a picture I found online. This is what happens to polyurethane no matter what you do. It's gonna deform over time when it's exposed to different heat cycles, and it just wears out. And once it gets a little bit of play in that inner sleeve, it makes it actually a worse feeling than the OEM engine mounts. You almost have no resistance to keep the engine locked in. So back to this mount, this is an OEM-like design, 60A durometer rubber, and this is more resistance to deforming over time. And hopefully this will last just as long as an OEM mount, being that it's using very similar materials. Of course, it looks really pretty, billet machined aluminum. Really, really nice piece. Let's go ahead and stop talking about it and let's get installing it. So another good reason to replace the rear engine mount is to prolong the life of this flex pipe. The less abuse this sees over its life, the longer it's going to last. These will eventually fail. This is something Honda didn't used to do in a lot of their older Hondas. It seems to be within the last 10 years they started doing this flex pipe between the engine and the mid pipe here. This is the rear motor mount. There's just 2 bolts holding in. On a 10th gen Civic, you have to remove this exhaust piece to get this bolt out. We're gonna see if that's the case on this one. Obviously I have the tray removed already. This bolt over here is a 19mm head. Let's see here if I can get this out without removing the exhaust. Looks like I can, so that's awesome. I don't know if they changed something between this and the 10th gen, but that came out pretty easy. Might have actually came out easier if I took this one off first, but this is actually a 17mm head. These definitely didn't seem like they were torqued to 67, so I'd be curious to know what the actual spec is, but they weren't that tight. And keep in mind, both of these bolts go into steel, so you don't have to really worry about when you're torquing it, you're gonna strip out any kind of aluminum threads. Pretty easy. These bolts are the same exact thread. However, the head size is different on them. I don't know why Honda did that, but maybe it's you don't mix them up, putting them back in, but one is significantly shorter. And now this should come straight out. That's probably the easiest job I've ever done. So here's a look at the 2 side by side. You can see the OEM one has the center hole offset and the meat of the bushing is kind of behind it to absorb, you know, dropping the clutch or whatever, so the engine pushes back this way. PRL is all uniform, solid rubber, so it's going to have a lot less give than the OEM mount, but you know, it's going to transfer more vibrations. This is rubber as well, roughly the same diameter as the rubber but probably the majority of the stiffness increase is just this back bushing. Looks like the OEM rubber up here is solid. Same with the PRL. They're eliminating all of this area that this thing can flex back and forth. You can see it's just straight through there. Don't have exact weights on them, but the PRL definitely feels much heavier than the OEM one. This is probably just cast aluminum, and then this is much thicker machined billet aluminum, so a lot more material used on this one. I'm not exactly sure which side goes up because the centerpiece is offset here, but I'm assuming the PRL logo stays face up when you install it. That would make most sense to me, so we'll try installing it that way first. It does indeed look like that was the correct way because both holes are lining up without much finagling here. So go ahead. This was a really easy install, guys. I did not expect it to be this easy. All right, you can see I scraped a little bit on the exhaust there, but it was much harder to get back in. But there must be less clearance inside the PRL sleeve than the OEM water mount sleeve, but the threads were kind of biting into the sleeve. I just took a little bit of a ratchet there and walked it in until it got past the thickest part of the pipe here. But make sure you get your washer on before you do that. Get this hand tight, come to the back here, get that up in there. Get it started by hand. Snug that one up. Gonna need some kind of wobble extension to get in this one without taking the exhaust off to get a torque value applied to it. These are actually 69 foot-pounds torque, not 67 I mentioned earlier. As you can see, I gotta flex the exhaust off a little bit just to get this wobble extension socket on there. So that's torqued now. Now we're gonna go back to this bolt on the rear. Hit 69 foot-pounds on the rear. That is it, guys. Check it out in there. Now all you gotta do is put back on your splash shield, take it for a rip. All right, guys, so it's been about a month since I installed the mount, and I really wanted to wait this long to bring you guys kind of my honest feedback after a month and see if the mount changed at all, if there was any kind of break-in period to it, and just give you the most comprehensive review I can. So I'll do a cold start here so you can listen. So first thing you'll notice is there is a little bit of a rumble. It is most prominent around 1200 RPM. Really only on a cold start. This is about as aggressive as the mount ever is on a cold start. When you drop down to your normal idle at 800 RPM, it's almost non-existent. You feel like you're pretty close to stock. But I will say the mount has broken in a little bit since I installed. It probably settled down after about the first week, and it's been stable now for probably 4+ weeks. So I've waited a few weeks to give you my driving impressions here, mainly because kind of sometimes when you install car parts, you get that placebo effect where you're all excited and you want to film your first reaction. That's not what I wanted to do here. I wanted to live with it for, you know, a good amount of time, put a lot of miles on the car, and give you my honest impressions about having this mount on this car. You can feel a little bit through that 1200 RPM range. I can honestly say this is one of my favorite mods so far. Granted, I've only done 2 mods to the drivetrain so far. I did the PRL intake in my last video, and this video is about the rear engine mount. But the rear engine mount costs less than half the PRL intake, and I would take this mod any day over the intake. This made such a huge difference with driving this car. From the fact that it makes you feel so much more connected with the car and eliminates a lot of that numb, disconnected feeling you get with a lot of these new modern cars where, for example, with this car being a manual transmission, it was so refined and so numb that you could not feel any feedback through the steering wheel really when you're turning and hitting bumps and just driving the car through the RPM range. And you couldn't really feel the engine at all, or rarely hear it. The car is very quiet from the factory. The PRL intake made it a little bit louder, but I still think the modified stock airbox was perfectly suitable. I don't know if I would go back in time and spend the $400+ on the PRL intake again when there is this engine mount available, because this engine mount gives just a little bit of vibration through the entire car, and more so, the most important part is it gives it through the steering wheel. You can actually feel what RPM the engine is at with a hint of vibration through the steering wheel, and it has gone down a little bit since I installed them. I will say, when I first installed the mount, it was vibrating everything a lot more. It felt more solid, and as weird as it sounds, I'm a little let down that it broke in so much. Most people would be happy to hear that the vibrations and everything were reduced after the mount broke in. However, when I first installed it and I had that little bit of extra vibration, I really liked the way the car felt and drove. Granted, it still feels 10 times better than the stock OEM rear mount, because you do still have that little bit of vibration translated, which helps out with a lot more driving dynamics than you really think about from first thought. For example, when downshifting, I'm still on the stock ECU. You've seen in my previous videos, I've complained a lot about the rev hang when you're downshifting, and not so much upshifting. The car doesn't really have much rev hang when you upshift, but when you downshift to lower gears, it can make it tricky to get the RPM rev match just perfect, because you can't feel anything. You really have to look at the tachometer to know when to release the clutch. Now with this mount, you get that extra dynamic of being more connected with the car to where you can kind of feel what's going on more. And that's a characteristic that's lacking in a lot of new cars that are more on the refined side for comfort and everything. But if you're buying a manual car, odds are you want that connected experience with the driveline. And this rear motor mount, being that it connects you to the engine RPM more, I think is a win-win for anyone buying a manual car. You want to be connected to the driveline. This is just goes hand in hand with that. I'd say if you do have a CVT car, it really makes no sense to add any vibrations to the car, because the RPMs are going to do whatever the transmission wants it to do. But if you're driving manual and you want to hit those downshifts, like, that was effortless. And I'm on the stock ECU, like I said. Before this motor mount, I don't think I would have done as well on those downshifts, to be honest. And the overall feeling is just, it's so good now. Like, when I'm cruising right now, and this is about the RPM I would be at on the highway in 6th gear, it's not any more noticeable with the NVH inside the car. It feels like, you know, perfectly comfortable. I've had my kids in the back seat. No one's complained about anything. It's not any really louder at all when you're cruising above 2,000 RPM. You don't feel really much at all besides the hint of vibrations through the steering wheel. The rest of the car does not get any negative effects of it. But all in all, I really couldn't imagine myself going back to that soft, disconnected feeling of the stock rear mount. And, you know, a lot of people associate installing these rear mounts with correcting wheel hop. However, that is exactly the opposite of what I've done. I'm not launching this car like I'm at the drag strip. I just use this car as a daily to work and back, haul the family around. And this little added bit that makes you feel more connected just makes this car feel more raw. It makes it feel like an older golden era Honda, where you have that feedback to the driver both through the steering wheel now. It almost makes it feel like I can connect more with the road, because you feel more of the road bumps and textures through the steering wheel. As weird as that sounds, but the RPM from the engine and that slight vibration from the engine just makes you feel everything more. I'd really have to recommend you guys do the mod and drive it yourself, because you really can't, it's really hard to put it into words how much better this makes the driving experience. When you're releasing the clutch and revving it up from a stop too, it does help you feel like you can feel when the car revs up to know when to release the clutch. And the lag that is there with the throttle pedal is more manageable since you have a little bit of better connected feel and you can feel what the engine's doing versus watching what the engine's doing. Another thing too is the engine definitely, you know, at lower speeds and even at higher speeds, when you get on the throttle and let off the throttle, it feels less like a rubber band where you have the engine rock and then lean back and then rock. Really have no complaints at all. It's not loud. There's no more extra vibrations in the dashboard or anything, which is surprising. I made a comment at the beginning of the video joking around about how installing this would make all the rattles I've experienced with this car more significant to where I would be able to diagnose them, but in fact, this had the exact opposite effect. The little bit of vibration I get through the car has not caused any other rattles. And when I'm in the higher RPM, remember I said that 4,000 to 5,000 RPM when you're getting off the throttle, you can hear that engine noise. That hasn't gone away, that's still there, but because you feel that vibration and a little bit of added noise from the engine through the car now, you don't hear it. It masks a lot of the annoying rattles that I've complained about before, because you're getting that more resonated noise from the engine throughout the car. And what I mean by that is it's nothing significant, but it's just enough to mask all those little sounds that you can concentrate on with the radio off. If you're thinking about it, this was only around $180, and I honestly wish PRL or another company offered a complete engine mount kit, because yes, you stiffen the rear mount, but the transmission mount and the passenger side engine mount still flex a lot, and they might even flex more now with the rear mount being stiffened, not allowing the bottom of the engine to rotate as much. So yeah, if there was a full kit for this car, I probably would even consider it, though the price would probably triple at that point. You're spending $600–700 then on a set of mounts, but just throwing the rear mount in, it's still EPDM rubber, so you're not going to have any degradation over time, any loosening of tolerances like a polyurethane mount, and I truly can't say enough good things about it. Thank you, PRL, for making this product. Thank you guys for watching this video. Leave a comment below, let me know what you think. Let me know if you found this video helpful in your decision looking at this mount, or maybe it's even a mod you didn't even consider doing to your car, and hopefully this small impromptu review here gives you some insight into how to improve the driving experience.